One of the most unsettling stories to come out of the Trump administration this week has nothing to do with another Trump dementia clip or a Truth Social post. It's a report that America's senior military leadership is very concerned about the way Donald Trump is running the Pentagon and also about the alliances of the United States under Trump. Now, we've learned about this because, according to veteran journalist John Sopel, the former BBC North America editor, he spent years covering Washington. He has relationships with the national security establishment. The report is that America's top military brass are extremely worried about Donald Trump's approach to defense and foreign policy, which is like, of course they are. Any sane person would look at what Trump is doing with defense and foreign policy and go, this doesn't seem so smart. And if this is true, that the military leadership is concerned about this, it is worth paying attention to. Active duty military officers don't go on TV to criticize the president. They don't hold press conferences. So that expectation, if we go, well, they should say it publicly and loudly and put their names on it. They really don't do that. And one of the things about the United States is that civilian control of the military is a bedrock principle. And so serving officers are expected to remain apolitical. If they are quietly acknowledging these concerns behind closed doors, we would expect that to be how they communicate. And the fact that they are communicating that tells us just how bad it has gotten. Now, Sopel describes conversations and observations suggesting that senior military leaders are very uneasy with Trump's approach to national security, to NATO, which I would argue also relates to national security, and management of the Pentagon, which also relates to national security. This is a pattern we've seen before. Go back to Trump's first term, and we saw an extraordinary number of retired generals and former senior military officials eventually speak out. We ultimately heard, from James Mattis, from Mark Milley, from John Kelly, H.R. McMaster. And these were not political pundits who just wanted TV appearances. They worked alongside Trump. Some of them resigned. Others waited until they had left government before they publicly spoke. But they said Trump is impulsive. When Trump is presented with expertise, he dismisses it because he knows better. He is hostile to America's traditional alliances. He's prone to making national security decisions based on instinct rather than strategy. And by the way, his instincts are terrible. And so we've seen this sort of thing before. Now, according to this reporting, many of today's military leaders reportedly have the exact same concerns. The difference is a lot of them are still serving, so their conversations are happening behind closed doors. One big issue driving the concern about Trump is Trump's view of NATO. And we can have a debate I think is a reasonable debate, important debate, about whether European countries should spend more on defense. Maybe they should. And presidents in the United States who have been Republicans and Democrats have made that argument. Barack Obama made that argument. Joe Biden made that argument. George W. Bush made it. So Trump is not the only Republican, nor is it only Republicans making the argument that allies should contribute more. Questioning whether the U.S. should be committed to NATO is very different. NATO works because the American commitment is credible. And the whole point of NATO is security through deterrence. Potential adversaries have to believe that attacking one NATO member really means you are confronting the United States and the entire alliance. If Trump starts going, as he has, well, I don't know if we'd necessarily come to the defense of any ally. In fact, Trump has threatened allies, like threatening Denmark with taking Greenland. When allies start wondering, is the United States really going to honor these commitments? That is a security risk to the United States and to our NATO allies. And Sopel points to Trump's hostile rhetoric towards NATO, his frustration that NATO didn't immediately show up to help him fight his war against Iran. His warmth with Vladimir Putin, by the way, is a concerning sign towards NATO. Now, these career military planners really do spend their lives thinking about alliances and logistics and intelligence sharing and deterrence and stability. These aren't partisan concepts, and there was a history in the United States of partisan differences being put aside for continuity in these alliances. And it's an important foundation of American security, I would argue. And one of the most striking lines from this report is that senior commanders are being quietly on our side when the commander-in-chief is not. In other words, that there are senior people who are not on the side of Trump. And there is another question that comes up, which is, if senior military leaders are this concerned, what should actually happen here? Well, the Constitution has an answer to that. The military serves under civilian authority. Its responsibility is to provide candid professional advice, carry out lawful orders, refuse unlawful orders, and stay outside of partisan politics. If you have senior military officials who believe the country is heading in a dangerous direction, they do have options. They can argue that case inside the chain of command. Okay. They can resign if they conclude that they can no longer faithfully serve. And after retirement, they can speak publicly, they can write a book, they can testify before Congress, they can tell Americans what they witnessed. Responsibility for changing political leadership, though, rests with democratic institutions and with Congress, the courts, the media, and voters. So when a story like this breaks, someone will inevitably say, the military is the only institution that can stop Trump. It's really not. That idea misunderstands how the American system works. And a military stepping in against an elected president is considered a coup. The strength of the United States is that power flows from citizens. And so if Americans believe the country is on the wrong path, we've got to get engaged civically. We've got to organize. We've got to vote. We've got to demand accountability. Military commanders are supposed to protect the country. We decide who governs it as civilians. However, when people who have spent their whole careers in the military thinking about all of this stuff I mentioned, and they are very worried about the direction under Donald Trump, we should then be saying, hey, we as the public need to evaluate what they're saying and judge whether this guy can really be allowed to remain as president. Now, one final thought. If these reports are accurate, the concern in the military isn't the story because generals are supposed to save the country. Like I said, they're not. It's here's another group of people who work closely with Trump, and they're reaching the same conclusions we've reached, which is that Trump really can't do it. And we've heard now from defense secretaries, retired generals, national security advisor, chiefs of staff, Trump doesn't have what it takes here. So there are two possibilities. Either a stunning number of experienced public servants, many lifelong Republicans, military officers, they've all arrived at the same conclusion, but they're wrong, they're confused, or they are right that Donald Trump is a threat to national security. We have a chance to vote. And even though Trump's not on the ballot, we are either endorsing people who rubber stamp everything Trump does or we don't. I say that we don't, and we get him the hell out of there.